Live from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. This special edition of 2020, the Vice President and the People. Now reporting, Chief Anchor George Stephanopoulos.
And welcome to our town hall with Joe Biden, Mr. Vice President. Welcome to you. Good to be with you.
With tonight's debate canceled, the president faces our questions live. And here's from voters about their concerns in the battleground state of Florida.
Some are still undecided. And we're going to try to take questions from as many of them as we can. Tonight, we're going to start with Nicholas Fetton. He's from Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. That's close to here in Philadelphia.
His case.
My goal is to
You're a
fight
Democrat.
for you.
I'm a Democrat.
And
Thank you,
fight
George.
for your family.
Mr. Vice President, every day, my wife and I are in disbelief at the lack of coordinated federal action on COVID-19.
Live from the Perez Art
We know that
Museum
your
in Miami.
administration would follow
Here's
the
Savannah
science.
Guthrie.
My question for
Hi,
you
everybody,
is
and
two
good
parts.
evening. It's good to have you with
First,
us, and
looking
welcome to
backwards
Miami and our
to when
town
this
hall
country first became
with
aware
President Donald Trump. But we want to say right off the
COVID-19.
top, this is not how
What would
things were
following the
supposed to go
science have
tonight.
meant
This was
in
supposed to
terms
be
of
a town
actual
hall
policy?
debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Looking forward,
but after the president contracted COVID,
what would
the
your
debate commission
administration
announced
do
it would have to be
in
a
terms
virtual
of following the
debate
science
because of health concerns.
with real
The
concrete
president then said
policies
he would not participate in a
haven't been
virtual
done by the
debate.
current
At that
administration?
point,
Well, first of
Joe
all, going
Biden
back,
scheduled a town hall
the
tonight in
fact is
Pennsylvania
that
on another
the
network, and now the
was
president
informed
is doing
how
the same.
dangerous
His
this
own town
virus
hall
was.
with the same venue,
all the way
format, and
back
time
in
as
the beginning of
NBC's town
February, I
hall with
argued that
Joe
we should be
Biden last
keeping
week.
people
So
in China.
the two candidates
And
go
we had
head-to-head
set up in our
tonight, though not
administration a
face-to-face,
pandemic office
each
within the
in a
White
key
House.
battleground
There were 44
state. And
people
tonight,
on
the
the
president
ground.
will be taking
I
questions
suggested
from
we should
voters
be
here in
seeking,
Miami.
and I didn't hold public
But we
office.
should mention
I
our
was a
socially
former vice
distanced, and
president.
they're wearing
I
masks.
suggested
And
we,
I
in
should say,
fact,
this
asked
audience
to
looks a
have
bit like
access to
America. It's
the
divided.
source of the
Some
problem.
here voted for the
And the
president
best
in
part now is
2016
Trump
and
never
plan
pushed
to
that.
again.
All those
Some
44
support
people
Joe
came
Biden,
home, never got
and some
replaced.
say they are
In
truly
addition to that,
undecided.
I
We're going to
pointed
get a
out
mix of
that I thought
questions
in
on a range
February I
of
did a
topics, and we're
piece
going to get to those
today
questions in a
saying
moment.
this is a
But
serious
first,
problem.
with all
Trump
that ado,
denied it. He said it
welcome,
wasn't.
Mr. President, and
We
thank you
later
for being
learned
here.
he knew full well how serious it was when he did an interview with
Thank
George
you.
Woodward.
We're glad you're
Bob
here.
Woodward.
We're glad you're
And
well.
at the time,
We send our best to the First Lady
he said
and to
he didn't
Barron.
tell anybody because
Do
he
you
was
have
afraid
any remaining
Americans would
symptoms
panic.
from COVID?
Americans don't panic. He panicked. He didn't say a word to anybody. Then I wrote a piece in March about what I thought we should be doing to take hold of this, using there's an act that's passed a long time ago that allows the president to go into a business and say, stop making this and start making that. And it took a long time for him to even institute that, to get ventilators and so on. And so the point was he missed enormous opportunities and kept saying things that weren't true. It's going to go away by Easter. Don't worry about it. It's going to all, when the summer comes, it's all going to go away like a miracle. He's still saying those things.
Before you go to the future, can I follow up on I'm looking backward just a little bit. You did have an op-ed in January where you warned to the seriousness of the pandemic, but there's no record of you calling for social distancing, limited social gatherings, mandatory.
Did the doctors ever tell you that they saw pneumonia on your lung scale?
That came at the end of March, and then I laid out a detailed plan relative to school openings in June and July. And I talked about, by that time, the science was becoming clearer and clearer of how this was spreading so rapidly. But the president kept denying that. If you notice, from March on, I stopped doing big meetings. I started wearing masks. So it was at a time
let's
when
talk about testing, because there's a little bit of confusion about this, and I think we can clear it up.
So what we should be doing now, there should be a national standard instead of leaving this up. Remember what the president said to the governors? Well, they're on their own. It's not my responsibility. The governors can do what they need to do, not my responsibility. It is the presidential responsibility to lead. And he didn't do that. He didn't talk about what needed to be done because he kept worrying, in my view, about the stock market. He worried if he talked about how bad this could be unless we took these precautionary actions, then in fact the market would go down. And his barometer of success in the economy is the market. Thirdly, what we didn't do is the president had an opportunity to open and allow schools and businesses to stay open if they got the kind of help they needed. So the Congress passed a couple $1 trillion worth of help, and what happened was most of that money, a significant portion of that money, went to the very wealthiest corporations in the country, didn't get to the mom and pop stores. So you had 1 in 5, 1 in 6 minority businesses closing, many of them permanently, people being laid off. And then what happened was when the first tranche of the first round of money for unemployment, enhanced unemployment, went by, he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. And to the best of my knowledge, and I mean this sincerely, I can't think I've been around for a lot of presidents, and you know a lot of presidents in the crisis. I don't ever remember one never calling the House and Senate Republican Democrats together.
Let's look forward a little bit. You said that you would lock down the economy only if the scientists said it was necessary.
Well, by the way, that wasn't the context. They said, well, I lock down the economy if science said so. I said I'd follow science. But I don't think there's a need to lock down.
But I want to press you on that point. You've been in the Oval Office for 8 years with President Obama. He would always say that only the hard to solve problems.
Okay, good. I've hopefully provided some clarity for folks. Let's talk about the event that was held at the White House on the Saturday before you tested positive. Subsequent to that, 13 people connected to that event tested positive. There was an outdoor reception.
You can contain the pandemic.
You've seen the pictures. There was an indoor reception. People were not wearing masks.
I laid out a plan how you can open businesses.
My question to you is, at this point in the pandemic,
in fact, you provide them the guidance that they need as well as the money to be able to do it. What's happening now is we know, for example, if you can open a business, you could have a sign on the door saying safe to come in. That's why people aren't going anyway when they're open. And say, because you have social distancing, you have plastic barriers. When you go to the cashier, you have separators between the booths. You don't have large crowds. You reduce the size of the number of people you can have in a restaurant. You make sure there's testing. That's a really critical piece that he didn't do. Testing and tracing. And you make sure that people are equipped going to schools. You know, we initially said, the government initially said they're going to provide masks for every student and every teacher. Then they said, no.
You can see people with a mask, though, right?
The president or whomever said, no, that's not a national emergency. Not a national emergency. We need more teachers in our schools to be able to open smaller pods. We need ventilation systems changed.
There are pictures of Tom Tillis actually with one of Judge Barrett's kids not wearing a mask.
I laid them out in some detail. Now, again, when I say I laid them out, I'm not an office holder. I'm running for office. It's not like I'm still vice president
he was sick, very sick. He was in the hospital for about a week.
He
came out tonight and said, I was wrong not to wear a mask.
But we did lay out exactly what needed to be done. And take a look. We make up 4% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's deaths. We're in a situation where we have 210,000+ people dead. And what's he doing? Nothing. He's still not wearing masks and so on.
We're getting some more questions on COVID. The next one comes from Kelly Lee. She's from Philadelphia. Republican. Voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Undecided now.
Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Hi, Mr. Biden. My question is about the coronavirus vaccine potential. Senator Harris stated that she absolutely would not take a vaccine from President Trump. And of course, we all know it's not President Trump that would create this vaccine. It would be doctors and scientists that presumably we all trust. So my question for you is, if a vaccine were approved,
you brought it up yourself. I mean, are you
between
trying
now
to
and the end of
suggest
the year,
that? Do you believe a grieving military family gave you COVID?
And if you were to become president, would you mandate that everyone has to take it?
Two things. Number one,
as the president, I have to be out there.
President Trump
there's no one that says you can't be out there, but it's just about wearing masks and having, for example, your rallies. Your rallies don't require masks.
The point is that if the scientists, if the body of scientists say that this is what is ready to be done, and it's been tested, it's gone through the 3 phases, yes, I would take it. I encourage people to take it. But President Trump says things like everything from this crazy stuff he's walking away from now, inject bleach in your arm, and that's going to work. I'm not being facetious. He's actually saying these things.
But as president, you're right. You want to be a leader, but you also are a leader and a setter of an example. And if you're not wearing a mask when your administration is saying best practice right now is wear a mask, no, it's not foolproof.
Most of the companies who are developing these vaccines are working. They're making real progress. I meet with 4 leading scientists at least twice a week in the beginning, 4 times a week, giving us the detail on what kind of progress is being made. And right now, they do the right thing. When they run into a serious problem, they halt the tests. They don't continue until they figure out what the problem was. They're not there yet. And the most scientists say it's not likely to have a vaccine that would be available until the beginning of next year, into the spring. next year.
things right here that will tell you exactly the opposite.
Is the same thing with the UK
is up 2,500% because I knew you'd be doing this. I know you very well. The UK is up 2,500%.
What's happening is there was no plan to figure out how to distribute it.
And the United States is down 21%.
But we have, our deaths per capita is among the highest of most in death
we don't have all the ability to get it to the people who need it. And what we should be doing now, and allegedly it's happening, but I've not seen it yet, nor the docs that I've talked to have seen it, there should be a plan when we have the vaccine, how do we distribute it?
And once we get it, if it's safe, if it's effective, will you mandate its use?
Got it.
The answer is depending on how clear there's vaccines, they say, have a very positive impact and they're going to affect positively 85% of the American public. Or there's others say this vaccine is really the key. This is the golden key. It depends on the state of the nature of the vaccine when it comes out and how it's being distributed. That would depend on, but I would think that we should be talking about depending on the continuation of the spread of the virus, we should be thinking about making it mandatory.
How could you enforce that?
Well, you couldn't. That's the problem. Just like you can't enforce measles. You can't come to school unless you have a measles shot. You know, you can't. But you can't say everyone has to do this. But you would, just like you can't mandate a mask. But you can say you can go to every governor and get them all in a room. All 50 of them as president and say, ask people to wear the mask. Everybody knows.
Herd immunity as a strategy?
Essentially, just let people get sick. Mayor, I go to every councilman, I go to every local official. Say, mandate the mask.
We did the right thing.
This is what you have to do when you're out. Make sure you encourage it being done.
Look, maybe more than that.
George, you and I know, and I think you do too as well, the words of the president matter. No matter whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, they matter. And when a president doesn't wear a mask or makes fun of folks like me when I was wearing a mask for a long time, then people say, well, it mustn't be that important. But when a president says, I think this is very important, for example, I walked in here with this mask, but I have one of the N95 masks underneath it.
I left it in the absolutely nothing, it would be 2 million. The question is, should the deaths be better than 200,000 when relative to the rest of the world we have a worse death rate?
That children are getting the virus, not with this serious consequences. But we haven't, there's been no studies done yet on vaccines for children. So there's a long way to go, but we can make progress in the meantime and save lives. And the last point I'll make, if you listen to the head of the CDC, he stood up and he said, you know, while we're waiting for a vaccine, and he held up a mask. You wear this mask, you'll save more lives between now and the end of the year than if we had a vaccine. Than if we had a vaccine. It's estimated by every major study done, from the University of Washington to Columbia, that if in fact we wore masks, we could save between now and the end of the year 100,000 lives.
And avoid lockdowns?
And avoid lockdown, yes. You don't have to lock down if you're wearing the mask.
Let's get a question on the economy. Anthony Arjuna.
I hope I answered your question.
From Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, it's a suburb of Pittsburgh, Republican. I know it for President Trump.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You stated that anyone making less than $400,000 will not see one single penny of their taxes raised. You also state that you are going to eliminate the Trump tax cuts.
We're not doing that, so let's clear up a few things from the last one.
The Trump tax cuts reduces taxes for the majority of workers. I would argue not enough. What is your plan for either extending the tax cuts for the middle class or creating a new plan that further reduces those taxes?
A couple of days later, on a different show, you announced white supremacy. My question to you is,
of the $2 trillion in his tax cuts went to the top 1/10 of 1%. That's what I'm talking about eliminating, not all the tax cuts that are out there. And by the way, if you just take a look, we reduced the corporate tax rate from 35%, and Democrats and Republicans who were in office thought it should come down to 28%. They reduced it to 21%. You have 91 out of the Fortune 500 companies not paying a single solitary penny. If you raise the corporate tax just back to 28%, which is a fair tax,
every time, in fact, when people get, I'm sure they'll ask you the white supremacy question. I denounce white supremacy. And frankly,
if you made sure that people making over 400 grand paid what they did in the Bush administration, 39.6%, you would raise another, it goes up to,
while we're denouncing, let me ask you about QAnon.
Another $92 billion.
Democrats
so you can raise a lot of money to be able to invest in things that can make your life easier. make you change your standard of living by making sure you have affordable health care, by making sure you're in a situation where you're able to send your kid to school. If you have a student debt, you can deal with it. Making sure you're home, you can pay your mortgage. You have 20 million people right now.
What you tell me doesn't necessarily make it fact.
You're going to raise the corporate tax. You're going to raise taxes on the wealthy.
About it.
Is it wise to do even that when the economy is as weak as it is right now? Another 900,000 people.
That's a great question. But I know nothing about it.
They believe it is a satanic cult run by the deep state.
I'll tell you what I do know about. I know about Antifa, and I know about the radical left, and I know how violent they are and how vicious they are, and I know how they're burning down cities run by Democrats, not run by Republicans.
Republican Senator Ben Sass said, quote, QAnon is nuts, and real leaders call conspiracy theories. Why not just say it's crazy and not true?
You may be right. I just don't know about
people to get back in the game and have a job. Everything moves.
I don't know.
Let me ask you another thing.
Right now, you got the opposite. You had last year, during this pandemic, you had the wealthiest billionaires in the world, in the nation.
I do have one more.
Let me just tell you, what I do hear about it is they are very strongly against pedophilia.
Recovery. It's a K-shaped recovery.
I mean, I do
if you're on the top,
and I agree.
you're going to
not
do
a
very well.
satanic
And the other thing I'm concerned, if you're on the bottom,
you don't know that?
Your income is coming down.
You just this week. Okay, just this week. You
want to raise. Hope you're a billionaire.
Why are you asking me about the radical left?
But it's about growing the economy. And George, the way out, the reason why I'm so optimistic about economic recovery, more than I've ever been, is we have these four crises happening all at once, and one helps the other. For example, we're going to invest a great deal of that money into infrastructure,
and they happen to be radical
into a green infrastructure.
Just this week,
we're
you
going to put
retweeted to your 87 million followers a conspiracy theory that Joe Biden orchestrated to have SEAL Team 6, the Navy SEAL Team 6, killed to cover up the fake death of Bin Laden. Now, why would you send a lie like that to your followers? You retweeted it.
Everything from making sure they have aircraft carriers to automobile fleets for the United States.
You're not like someone's crazy uncle who can just retweet whatever.
That was a
retweet trade agreement, and I do a lot of retweets. If you actually insist that whatever that product is made in America, including the material that goes into the product, it's estimated we're going to create somewhere between another 4 and 6 million jobs just by doing that. But what's happening now? Under his trade policy, a lot of this is going overseas. You get a benefit from going overseas if you have much of it being made overseas. So if you send overseas, you get a 10% tax increase on the product. If you make it in America, you bring it back, you get a 10% growth. If you bring back a company and you're going to open up an old facility, you get a 10% tax credit for all you invested.
Repeatedly, the only way we lose this election is if it is rigged. Now, that is simply not true. The fact is either candidate can lose fair and square without ballot fraud. So will you accept the results of the election?
We are a democracy. Some of my Republican friends and some of my Democratic friends even occasionally say, well, if you can't get the votes by executive order, you're going to do something. Things you can't do by executive order unless you're a dictator. We're a democracy. We need consensus.
Got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
From the Constitution Center in Philadelphia,
we could go all night, which we won't. But we could go all night, one by one, a single case, a single day. You're talking about 150 million votes. Your own FBI director says there is no evidence of widespread fraud.
Thank you, George. And good evening, former Vice President Biden. Many people believe that the true swing demographic in this election will be black voters under the age of 30. Not because they'll be voting for Trump, but because they won't vote at all. I myself have had this exact same conflict. So my question for you then is, besides you ain't black, what do you have to say to young black voters who see voting for you as further participation in a system that continually fails to protect them?
Well, I say, first of all, as my buddy John Lewis said, it's a sacred opportunity right to vote. You can make a difference. If young black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do that. And the next question is, am I worthy of your vote? Can I earn your vote? And the answer is, there's two things I think that I care, I've demonstrated that I care about my whole career. One
there is, in fact, no evidence of widespread fraud, and you were sowing doubt about our democracy.
Our democracy.
How can you say that? You do read newspapers.
I do.
Watch the news.
Yes, I do.
And so you look at what that entails. It entails everything from early education. That's why I'm supporting making sure that when you Title I schools, as you know, schools with the least tax base to be able to support their schools. I increased the funding for them from 15 to
But why are you laying the groundwork for that right now? It's like if I go play tennis with my husband and I say my ankle's hurting right now.
I don't want that to happen.
The problem now is they're leaving the schools. They're not there. We're short about 1.5 million teachers, 1.25 million teachers. Number two, every 3 and 4 and 5-year-old will go to school.
Talk about the peaceful transfer when I spent 3.5 years fighting off these maniacs, and now it turns out
talks about in the last 8 years what's happened. What happens when you let them go to school, they make up rapidly whatever
peaceful transfer. I absolutely want that, but ideally I don't want to transfer because I want to win.
And I think that your words will probably reassure some folks. Let's get to our first voter. We've got Jacqueline Lugo. Now she is, I told you this audience is truly split between y'all. You were leaning Biden. She voted for Clinton in 2016. She's registered as an independent. Jacqueline, what's your question for the president? And hold the mic up close and take off your mic because it's hard to hear out here.
Psychologists. We have one school psychologist in America now for every 1,570 kids. It should be 1 to 500, not just in schools that are poor, but in all schools. Because we learned that, for example, drug abuse doesn't cause mental illness. Mental illness causes drug abuse.
As you told Bob Woodward in February was
and deal with their
airborne and deadlier than the flu.
I provide for $70 billion
Why did you only put in place
for them to be able to have the wherewithal to do what other universities can do,
and
because they don't have the kind of foundational support they need. And so that would allow them, for example, like we did in our administration, the president allowed me to go down and we awarded
well, I did put it in very early, as you know. Joe Biden was 2 months behind me, and he called me xenophobic and racist and everything else because I put it in. And it turned out that I was 100% right. I also put it on Europe very early because I saw there was a lot of infection in Europe. And it's sort of an amazing question, and I appreciate the question and respect the question. But the news doesn't get out the right answer because I put on a travel ban far earlier than Dr. Fauci thought it was necessary, who I like, far earlier than the scientists. I was actually the only one that wanted to put it on, and I did it actually against the advice of a lot of people, including Nancy Pelosi, who had no clue what she was doing, and Biden. When I put on the travel ban, you know, I put it on in January, the end of January. When I put on the travel ban,
all the studies now show, and I've been arguing this for a long time, is young black entrepreneurs are just as successful as white entrepreneurs.
Dr. Fauci said I saved thousands and thousands of lives. I was early. I was extremely early when I put on the travel ban.
Can I ask you, did your national security advisor on January 28th in the Oval Office warn you that this would be the greatest national security risk of your administration?
And that generated
$30 billion
came off the sidewalk.
I read it someplace, maybe Woodward said it or something, but no, he did not say that. But I knew it was a big threat. At the same time, I don't want to panic this country. I don't want to go out and say everybody's going to die. Everybody's going to die.
There a middle ground. You don't have to mislead, but you can.
I'm changing that program. I'll get this done without much trouble, I believe, in the Congress.
You're going to like this next couple of voters. It's a mom and a daughter. Mom, Barbara, voted for you in 2016. She's leaning to vote for you again. Now, her daughter was too young to vote last time. She's going to vote for her first time in a presidential campaign. And she is leading Biden. So imagine the dinner table at their house, okay? So, Barbara, why don't you go first and ask your question?
But my home was in a white neighborhood.
Thank you.
Mr. Trump, as a frontline ER doctor working through the coronavirus pandemic,
your home will start off being
firsthand, and I've seen that many hospitals throughout the United States are suffering financial hardships.
You'll be taxed more for it. We've got to end this. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place. They call redlining. We can change so much
across the country.
We can do so much to change the circumstances
our salaries
to give people a real opportunity.
And this is also happening in other economic sectors as well, including the travel industry and hospitality.
I think
My question to you is,
well, there's a lot more if you want to get hang out afterwards. I'll tell you more.
Okay. Both in terms of the economy and the pandemic.
Look, this is the way every other. How do most, like my dad, he lost busted his job up in
Scranton. We are going to have a phenomenal
and it took him 3 years to be able to move down to Delaware to Claymont, Delaware, steel town, and sent us home to our grandpa to live with him. We finally got back. We lived in apartments, became 6 and 8 housing much later. It wasn't normal apartments. But it took him 5 years to be able to buy a home. Well, we bought a 3-bedroom home with 4 kids and a grandpa living with us. But it accumulated wealth. You built up wealth. That's how middle-class folks make it. They build up wealth. Then he's able to borrow a little against that to be able to help us get to school, those kinds of things. It's about accumulating wealth. And it's very, you're behind an 8 ball. The vast majority of people of color are behind an 8 ball. And it's the same way what's going on now with all this money that's been voted. What's happening? You go to the bank, if you're a black businessman, and the president fired the only inspector general to oversee all this help coming from the Congress. And what happens? You go in and they say, do you have an account here? No. Do you have a credit card with this? No. Have you borrowed this before? No. We bail these suckers out. They're not liable for any of the money. But they still won't lend it to you. We got to change that. It's about accumulating wealth.
Want to get another question in here from Angelica Port Showers? No, not at all. Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania. Republican who voted for President Trump last time.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Vice President Biden. Nice to meet you. What's your view on the crime bill that you wrote in 1994, which showed prejudice against minorities? Where do you stand today on that?
Well, first of all, things have changed drastically. That crime bill, when it voted, the Black Caucus voted for it, every black mayor supported it across the board. And it didn't, the crime bill itself did not have mandatory sentences except for 2 things. But it had 3 strikes and you're out, which I voted against in the crime bill, but it had a lot of other things in it that turned out to be both bad and good. I wrote the Violence Against Women Act. That was part of the assault ban and other things that were good.
Healthcare workers.
What I was against
I've seen the physical and the mental tolls that this pandemic has taken on them firsthand, as well as the exacerbation of coronavirus due to Americans who are not wearing masks or participating in social distancing. After contracting COVID-19 yourself, has your opinion changed on the importance of mask wearing?
I don't believe anybody should be going to jail for drug use. They should be going into mandatory rehabilitation. We should be building rehab centers to have these people housed. We should wipe out, we should decriminalize marijuana, wipe out the records so you can actually say honestly you've never been arrested for anything. You could say no, because we're going to pass a law saying there is no background that you have to reveal relative to the use of marijuana. And so there's a lot of things, but in addition to that, we got to change the system. I joined with a group of people in the House to provide for changing the system from punishment to rehabilitation. Along with a guy named Marlon Spector, you may remember, I wrote the Second Chance Act.
In the meantime, an awful lot of people were jailed for minor drug crimes after this. Was it a mistake to support it?
Yes, it was. But here's where the mistake came. The mistake came in terms of what the states did locally. What we did federally, we said it was about, and remember, George, it was all about the same time for the same crime. What I had done as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I took the 10 circuit courts of appeals, took some really brilliant lawyers working for me in the Judiciary. We did a study, and we determined what happens if, for the first, second, third offense, for any crime in the criminal justice system,
everyone put on a mask right now, and the University of Washington says you will save lives.
If you're a black man, it's the first time you committed robbery. How long would you go to jail on average? If you're a white man, how long? Black man would go to jail on average 13 years. White man, 2 years.
But then you have a report
I go down the list of every single crime. So we set up a sentencing commission. We didn't set the time. Every single solitary maximum was reduced in there. But what happened was it became the same time for the same crime. So it said you have to serve between 1 and 3 years. It ended up becoming much lower. Black folks went to jail a lot less than they would have before, but it was a mistake.
Let me ask another follow-up on the crime. They had also funded 100,000 police back in 1994. You've often said that more cops clearly mean less crime. Do you still believe that?
Yes, if in fact they're involved in community policing, not jump squads. For example, when we had community policing from the mid-90s on till Bush got elected, what happened? Violent crime actually went down precipitously. Remember the significant rise in violent crime that was occurring in the late 80s into the 90s. It went down, and fewer African Americans were arrested because you had the requirement. The cops didn't like it. They didn't like the community policing because you had to have two people in a vehicle. They had to get out of their cars. They had to introduce themselves to who owned the local liquor store, who owned the local grocery store, who was the woman on the corner. And what they would do, George, they'd actually go and give people their phone numbers. A cop would give the phone number. So if Nellie Smith was on the second floor where drug deals took place and things happened below her, her apartment, she could call and say, it's Millie, and there's something going on here, and they'd never reveal it was her because they know if she knew that, in fact, they'd never report the crime. She'd never report. So it actually started to come down. What happened? They eliminated the funding for community policing. Community policing doesn't mean more people coming in up-armored Humvees and swarming like that. When they did, it turned out that by the time we got to the late 90s, the crime had come down so much, and the mayors and everybody asked the question, where do you want me to spend the money? They say, well, only 1% thought violent crime was a problem. It was as high as 22%.
But right now we have a systemic problem. How do you get the kind of policing, prevent the kind of policing?
You have to change the way in which they police. One of the things I'm going to do, George, is set up a national study group made up of cops, social workers, as well as made up of the black community and the brown community to sit down in the White House and over the next year come up with significant reforms that need to take place within communities. You have to bring them together. One of the things I've observed is, you know, the neighborhood I grew up in Claymont, you either became a cop, a firefighter, or a priest. I wasn't qualified much to do any one of them. But here's the deal, all kidding aside. Most cops don't like bad cops.
Correct.
They don't like it.
That's correct.
And so what happens is they get intimidated into not reporting. So one of the things we do is there has to be transparency available. We have to be able to go in at the federal level, be able to go in and check out whether or not there's systematic problems within police departments. If, in fact, a cop needs to be tried, it's not the prosecutor in the community, in the district where they are. You got to go outside the community to get another prosecutor to come in and handle the crime. There's a lot of things we've learned, and it takes time, but we can do this. You can ban chokeholds, you can, but beyond that, you have to teach people how to de-escalate circumstances. De-escalate. So instead of anybody coming at you and the first thing you do is shoot to kill, you shoot them in the leg. There's ways you have to do more background checks in terms of whether or not the person coming in passes certain psychological tests. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry because it's really, I think, really important, is you have to be in a position where you are able to identify the things that have to change. And one of the things that has to change is so many cops get called into circumstances where somebody is mentally off, like what happened not long ago, that guy with the knife. That's why we have to provide within police departments psychologists and social workers to go out with the cops on those calls, some of those 911 calls,
and we have
to
get our own
de-escalate the circumstance. To
As
deal
you know,
with talking
healthcare
down.
costs have gone up considerably.
But we can't. Cops are kind of like school teachers now.
You
know, school teacher has to know everything from how to handle
what is your plan now in 2020
as well as how
to
to
make
teach how to read.
Healthcare costs affordable
cops
for
don't have
Americans
that
like
breadth.
myself?
And there's a lot of things we can do. We shouldn't be defunding cops. We should be mandating the things that we should be doing within police departments and make sure there's total transparency.
Got to take another quick break. We'll be right back.
From the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, here again, George Stephanopoulos.
And the Supreme Court is our next topic. The questioner, Nathan Osborne of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Democrat.
Conditions, and I can't say
Hi,
that more
George,
strongly.
Mr. Vice President.
We've been able to bring
Our country's first
healthcare
Supreme Court
costs
gave its first
way down.
ruling just 2 blocks
Now,
from here,
I
from
took over
1791 to
Obamacare, got rid of the
1800,
individual
and it's
mandate,
become more
made it good,
polarized since
managed it
then.
much
Merrick
better.
Garland
Remember,
didn't
they
get a
had
hearing
the
for all of
$5 billion
2016, and Amy Coney Barrett's being pushed through at the last minute, even though millions have already voted.
The problem with Obamacare,
so what do you think about
it's not
ideas
good.
from
We'd
people
like
like
to
Pete
terminate
Buttigieg
it,
and
and
others
we
to
want
put
a
in place
much less
safeguards
expensive
that will help
healthcare
ensure more
more long-term balance and stability. And what do you say to LGBTQ Americans and others who are very worried right now about erosions of their rights and our democracy as a whole?
Well, let me start the last point, work my way back. I think there's great reason to be concerned. I was on the road most of the time during these hearings,
this is
so
such
I
a
didn't
big
hear
issue
many of
for
them. I just got the
voters.
recaps when
In point of fact, your administration is about to go to the Supreme Court to argue to throw out the rest of Obamacare, which includes the protections for pre-existing conditions. So your administration is in court right now trying to get rid of that protection.
In order to replace it with a much better health care at a much lower price, the basis upon which he thinks are the unenumerated rights in the Constitution.
We are going to protect
the Republicans. So I think there's great reason to be concerned for the LGBT community, something I fought very hard for a long time to make sure there's equality across the board. Number two, I think that also health care overall is very much in jeopardy as a consequence of the president's going to go directly after this election directly to the Supreme Court within a month to try to get Obamacare wiped out after we've already 10 million people have already lost their insurance from their employer and wants to take 20 million people out of the system as well, plus 100 million people with pre-existing conditions. So there's a lot at stake. I don't think it's appropriate. I think the Constitution implies. There's no provision in the Constitution. My problem is I've made a mistake of teaching constitutional law for 21 years and the separation of powers. The Constitution implies that the way that people have a right to determine who's going to be on the court is how they vote for their senators and their president.
In November, those pre-existing conditions, that promise will be gone.
The president's president for all 4 years, isn't he?
We are running the remnants of whatever's left because we took it apart.
By implication,
we are running the
it is
inconsistent
with the constitutional principles, in my view. You get disagreement among scholars on this. But I believe it's inconsistent when millions of people already voted to put someone on the court.
Let me get to question number 5, and you'll like this. He's stuck in traffic. His name is Joe White.
See what the makeup of the
He is registered as a Democrat. He says he's leaning toward Biden, and Biden had voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And his question was, a second stimulus payment has been broadly agreed upon by the Republicans and Democrats, and yet now we're in October and it's still not passed. Why not use your office to make the second stimulus payment a separate, targeted emergency relief package to help Americans weather the pandemic?
If I had answered the question directly, then all the focus would be on what's Biden going to do if he wins. Instead of on, is it appropriate what is going on now? And it should stay, this is the thing that the president loves to do, always take our eye off the ball. What's at stake? One of the things Pete has suggested is, and there's a number of constitutional scholars have suggested as well, that there are at least 4 or 5 options that are available to determine whether or not you can change the way in which the court lifetime appointment takes place, consistent, arguably, with the Constitution. I have not been a fan of court packing because I think it just generates what will happen. Whoever wins, it just keeps moving
People do not love the back and forth of Washington, but this has been a roller coaster.
So you're still not a fan?
Well, I'm not a fan.
Back in early October, you one day tweeted, no more negotiations
not how he wins, but how it's handled.
Until after Election Day.
But there's a number of things that are going to be coming up.
Then I think the next couple of days you said maybe we can do something targeted. Then you said I want a big bill. But then Senate Republicans said, no, we're not for that.
Real live debate
so you're the big deal maker. How come this is so, how come you yourself have changed positions?
You know, I don't know anybody who's gone on the floor and that's been a controversial justice in terms of making fundamentally all the
lives are hanging in the balance.
That's gone through in a day kind of thing. I mean, it depends on how much they rush this. And you think about it, George. Here you got a lot of people not being able to pay their mortgage, not being able to put food on the table, not being able to keep their business open, not being able to do anything to deal with what's going on in terms of the economy and the consequence of COVID. And they have no time to deal with that.
I want it to be bold. I want the money to go to direct.
Are Senate Republicans with you? They're going to go big, big old number?
They're going to be
if they
so far they have not said they will.
Open to expanding the court?
I'm open to considering what happens from that point on.
You know, you said so many times during the campaign, all through the course of your career, it's important to level.
It is. George, if I say, no matter what answer I gave you, if I say it,
this is
that's the
interesting. She
headline
voted for
tomorrow.
Clinton in 2016, but recently changed her registration from Democrat to Independent.
They do have
she
a right
says
to know
she's
where
truly
they stand.
undecided. Her name's Becky Lightman. Hello, Becky.
So you'll come out with a clear position before Election Day?
I'm great. How are you?
Depending on how they handle it.
Good to see you.
But look, what you should do
corporate tax
is you got to make sure you vote.
A hot button issue.
And vote for a senator
and you have cut
who, in fact,
corporate tax rates,
reflects
and your opponent Joe Biden is planning to raise them. A lot of Americans
who think is more in line with you. And if
don't
you
pay their share of
oppose a position that I would not have appointed her. But if you oppose my position, vote for Trump. Vote for a Republican who shares that view. But that's your opportunity to get involved in lifetime appointments that presidents come and go. Justices stay and stay and stay.
You have a question from a Republican, Andrew Lewis. I guess a disaffected Republican. You've cast a writing vote for John Kasich in 2016. You're going to vote against President Trump this year.
John's writing for me, by the way.
I know that.
Mr. Vice President, my father, Drew Lewis, served as Secretary of Transportation under President Ronald Reagan in his first term.
Oh, yeah. I'll be darned.
And some of his closest allies and friends were Democrats, including House Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senator Ted Kennedy. Sadly, today we have highly partisan and dysfunctional governance, and I believe President Trump is primarily responsible for creating this toxic environment. As President, how will you avoid the temptation to exact revenge and instead take the high road and attempt to restore bipartisanship, civility, and honor to our democracy?
As written by a fellow who won the Pulitzer Prize for a book he wrote about the presidency, he said, you know, I doubt whether Biden is really Irish. He doesn't hold a grudge. In politics, grudges don't work. They make no sense. I really mean it. I have never, and the second point I'd make is, everybody talks about, yeah, Joe, when you're a senator, you're chairman of foreign relations, or chairman of this, you got a lot of things done, you're able to cross the aisle, but the days have changed, and you're vice president, you got a lot done, but it can't happen anymore. It can't. We got to change the nature of the way we deal with one another. And it starts off by the way your father was and Tip was and others. You don't question another man and woman's motive. You can question their judgment, but not their motive. We badly need an infrastructure bill. Well, what happens? I stand up and I say, you know, we need an infrastructure bill, Senator, but I tell you what, you're in the pocket of the cement industry. But let's see what we can do. You can't get anywhere. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. I learned that lesson a long time ago. I've never, even when it's obvious on its face what the motive is, stick to the subject and listen to the other guy. Listen. What I will be doing if I'm elected president, the first thing, and not a joke, and you can ask if they tell you your dad's old friends on the Republican side. I'm going to pick up the phone and call them and say, let's get together. We got to figure out how we're going to move forward here, because there's so many things we really do agree on. And with Trump out of the way, the vindictiveness of a president going after Republicans who don't do exactly what he says gets taken away. There's going to be, I promise you, between 4 and 8 Republican senators are willing to move on things with a bipartisan consensus. Last example I'll give you. You know, after Trump had been elected, named the next president, wasn't sworn in yet, I've been working on a thing called a bill relating to cancer cures. And it was called the Cancer Moonshot. And I worked with a number of Democrats and Republicans, and we had a bill that was about $9 billion that made significant increases in research and development on cancer alternatives in NIH and predictive cancer, specific cancer initiatives. And we only had, at the time, I think it was 111 or 114, whatever it was, votes in the House. I don't hold an exact number. And we had fewer than 40 in the Senate. But after he was elected, I got those people together as vice president. We sat down and we worked it out. And we ended up getting it past 396 votes in the House and 94 votes in the Senate. And at the end of the day, because it had to do with the Biden cancer moonshot I've been working on, Mitch McConnell stood up, and I was presiding officer, and moved to name the bill after my deceased son, Bo, who just died. So there are ways to bring this together.
But how about the question of political accountability? Is there some tension between that and bringing people together? You know, Robert Mueller laid out a lot of evidence of possible obstruction of justice by President Trump. What would a Biden Justice Department do with that evidence?
What the Biden Justice Department will do is let the Department of Justice be the Department of Justice. Let them make the judgments of who should be prosecuted. They are not my lawyers. They're not my personal lawyers.
So you're not going to rule it in or rule it out?
I'm not going to rule it in or out. I'm going to hire really first-rate prosecutors and people who understand the law, like Democrats Democrat and Republican administrations have had, and let them make the judgments. But turning this into a vehicle for you as if it's your own law firm, you don't own that Justice Department. You pick the best people you can, and you hope that what they're going to do is they're going to enforce the law as they see it. But can you remember any Republican president going out there, or former Democratic president, go find that guy and prosecute him? Or, by the way, I'm being sued because a woman's accused me of rape. Represent me. Represent me. Personally represent me in the state of New York on my not allowing my tax returns. What's that all about?
My son is here.
What is that about?
Time to take another break. We'll be right back.
From the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, here again, George Stephanopoulos.
And welcome back to our town hall with former Vice President Joe Biden. We're going to look at the environment right now. We're going to get a question from Michelle Elise from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a businesswoman, a social worker. You're a Republican who's voted for Democrats, but you're not sure what you're going to do this time around.
They have to go to jail.
Correct?
It's illegal.
Correct.
But their numbers were wrong.
Greetings, former Vice President Biden. Thank you.
I don't owe money to any
in a
of these
2012 report of the University of Pittsburgh's Institute of Politics, fracking was discussed and its possible implications for the waterways from the Commonwealth to the Gulf. Fracking has made the population sick and killed wildlife in southwest Pennsylvania. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and small business development centers have already begun to transition people away from fossil fuels. What industries that are not harmful to human health and the environment are you planning for Southwest Pennsylvania and the nation?
Right, let's take a break.
Well, first of all, I make it clear, I do not propose banning fracking. I think you have to make sure that fracking is in fact not emitting methane or polluting the well or dealing with what can be small earthquakes and how they're drilling. So it has to be managed very, very well, number one. Number two, what we have to do is the future rests in renewable energy. The single fastest growing energy source in the world right now, because I'm going to say something that's going to sound self-serving, but I managed the Recovery Act, and I was able to invest billions of dollars into bringing down the cost per BTU of wind and solar. So now it's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than oil right now. And it has great, great promise. And it's also the fastest growing employer in the energy industry. And so there are a number of things that I would do immediately. Number one, there are well over 100,000 wells that are left uncapped in the region. We could hire 128,000 of these people who are working in the industry to cap these wells and get a good salary doing it now, number one. Number two, we should be moving toward finding the new technologies that are going to be able to deal with carbon capture. So ultimately, as a transition, we moved to a net zero emission of carbon, that we're still going to be able to use, if we find the right technology, some gas to be able to, if we can carbon capture. And I think we're going to be able to move in a direction where by the year 2035, we'll be able to have net zero emissions of carbon from the creation of energy creation. So we can move it by dealing with those. And every time we talk about global warming or the environment, the president thinks it's a joke, and I think it's jobs. Because what we're going to have happen is, you'll be able to see now, as I started to say before, I, as president, am going to invest that $600 billion we spend in government contracts only on those things that, in fact, also are not only made in America, but building an infrastructure that's clean and new. And what we have to do is focus on the transmission of energy across the country from areas relating to solar and wind. The reason is that that has not been mastered yet. I met a lot of people in Silicon Valley. The battery technology is increasing significantly, so you're going to be able to have, for example, solar on your home and a battery this by this, as I'm showing you here, in your basement. So when the sun doesn't shine for 5 days, you still have enough energy. So we're making significant progress. The other thing we're going to do is provide an awful lot of work. It's estimated to put close to 1 million people to work by weatherizing 4 million buildings and 2 million homes, because we'll save tons and tons of energy, or like billions of barrels of energy over time, and at the same time provide significant employment and a good union wages, prevailing wages.
Let me stick on fracking for a second. You said you don't want to ban fracking. As you know, it's an important issue here in Pennsylvania. Not everyone buys your denial. A member of the Boilermakers Local 154, Sean Stefani, was quoted in the New York Times today saying, "You can't have it both ways." He says you can't meet your goal to end fossil fuels without ending fracking. What do you say to people like Sean who doubt your denial because they think you want to keep that promise?
Tell them the Boilermakers overwhelmingly endorse me, okay? So the Boilermakers unions endorsed me because I sat down with them in great detail with the leadership exactly what I would do, number one. Number two, what I would do is I would stop giving tax breaks and subsidizing oil.
We are live in Miami in the middle of a town hall with President Trump. Thank you again for being here. We've got another voter,
over time.
Adam Sugar.
What I would also do with regard to
in 2016. He's registered as a Democrat and says he's supporting Biden.
They say automatically by 2030 we're going to be carbon free. Not possible.
So are you for or against it? You say you're not for it, but in your website it says you call it a crucial framework.
My deal is a crucial framework, but not the new Green Deal. The new Green Deal calls for elimination of all non-renewable energy by 2030. You can't get there. You're going to need to be able to transition, George, to be able to transition to get to the place where we invest in new technologies that allow us to do things that get us to a place where we get to net zero emissions, including in agriculture. I've laid out a detailed plan. We should be taking the plan where we allow significant more land to be put in conservation, plant deep-rooted plants which absorb carbon from the air, and in fact pay farmers to do it. We can do things like pelletize all the chicken manure and all the horse manure and cow manure, and they can take out the methane and use it as fertilizer and make a lot of money doing it. For example, right now down in people, when I say that, they wonder what I'm talking about. The biggest carbon sink in the world is the Amazon. More carbon absorbed from the air, diminishing global warming in the Amazon than all the carbon emitted on a yearly basis from the United States of America, from all vehicles and all means. So we have to use our imaginations. We have to move in the direction as well, providing for electric vehicles. Electric vehicles will save billions of gallons of oil, create estimated, not me, Wall Street, 1 million automobile jobs.
Can I just, to the voters' point, I'll just say that in 2016 you were on another show, actually another morning show, and you were asked whether President Obama should nominate a Supreme Court Justice Merrick Garland, and you said, I think the Senate should wait until the next president and let the president pick. Now, that was 8 months before the election. This is 3 weeks before the election. So you have changed your position.
Yes, I have a lot of respect for Judge Garland, I want to tell you that.
So,
but I'll tell you,
peace is breaking out all over the world. Our troops are coming home.
The way they treated Justice
Serbia is talking to Kosovo.
I have never seen any
and the
human
Arabs
being,
and
and I'm not just
Israelis
talking
are
about
talking
Supreme
peace,
Court,
which I believe is a modern-day miracle. What's going on? Does President Trump's foreign policy deserve some credit?
I have never seen anything like it.
Not a whole lot.
And you know what? The truth is, Savannah, like it or not, the ball game changed a lot. There has never been anybody treated so badly as now Justice Kavanaugh.
You've mentioned that you would like to see Amy Coney Barrett confirmed to the Supreme Court in case any challenges come up in connection with the election. Do you expect her to rule for you?
Allies are publicly saying they can't count on us.
I don't think she has any conflict at all. You know, as Supreme Court judge does not have, I mean, they can make their own decision.
In the Western Pacific, where we're isolated as well.
And they actually have additional
Japan
power to make that decision.
And South Korea at odds with one another. China is making moves. So I would say we find ourselves less secure than we've been. I do compliment the president on the deal with Israel recently.
Won't, and I hope it doesn't ever get to the Supreme Court.
If you take a look, we're not very well trusted around the world. When 17 major nations of the world were asked, can they trust more who's a better leader, and the president came in behind both the national survey, international survey, both behind Putin, as well as Xi.
And I think a lot of people in my position might,
bounties on American military heads in Afghanistan. There are more people there now, by the way, than when I left when we left in Afghanistan. And we find ourselves ourselves in a situation where he's talked to Putin 6 times, hadn't said a word to him. And NATO is on the risk of beginning to crack because they doubt our concern whether we're there. You see what's happening in everything from Belarus to Poland to
our next voter. She's leaning to you, Mr. President. She voted for you in 2016. She is a registered Republican. Her name is Mariah Green.
This president embraces all the thugs in the world.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President. I'm honored to be with you here tonight,
he doesn't take
sir,
on
so
Putin
thank
in any
you.
way.
I'm a pro-life millennial, and my question for you today is, if Roe v. Wade is ultimately overturned in the future, what protections would be put in place or kept for where the mother's life is in jeopardy in relation to high-risk pregnancies?
Well, again, I'm not ruling on this. Roe v. Wade is something that a lot of people say, obviously, you're going to speak to somebody. I also,
not just by the exercise of our power, the most powerful nation in the world,
Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh. I never spoke to them about Roe v. Wade. I never spoke to them about election laws. I never spoke to them about anything. And I've done the right thing from a moral standpoint. I don't even know from a legal standpoint, but it was the right thing.
Literally, not figuratively, when he goes to the United
depending
Nations.
on what happens
I mean, it's
with
just not. It's
Roe
not
v.
about
Wade, I think that
the president per
perhaps
se.
it could
It's
get
about
sent
the
down
nation
to the
and
states,
the lack of respect
and the
that's
states
shown
would
to us.
decide.
I want to get one more question in this segment. It comes from Mika Hack. She's from State College, Pennsylvania. This is your first presidential election that you're voting.
And some people would say you can talk to her about it. I just think it would be inappropriate.
But what is your preference? Because it agreed that's not something you should talk to the judge about. But would you like to see Roe versus Wade overturned?
The Trump administration has attacked the rights of transgender people, banning them from military service,
in great depth
weakening non-discrimination protections, and even removing the word transgender from some government websites.
I think that she's going to make a great decision. I did not tell her what decision to make, and I think it would be inappropriate to say right now because I don't want to do anything to influence her. I want her to get approved, and then I want her to go by the law, and I know she's going to make a great decision for our country.
You're running as a pro-life Republican. Most pro-life Republicans would like to see Roe v. Wade overturned and abortion banned.
You may recall, I'm the guy who said, I was raised by a man who, I remember I was being dropped off. My dad was a high school educated, well-read man who was a really decent guy, and I was being dropped off to get an application in the center of our city, Wilmington, Delaware, a corporate capital of the world at the time. And these two men, I'm getting out to get an application to be a lifeguard in the African-American community because there was a big swimming pool complex.
This is Cindy Velez. She is undecided. She says she's leaning to Biden, and she did vote for Clinton in 2016.
I'm getting out of the car at the light, and I turn to my dad.
As a Democrat.
My dad looked at me and said, Joey, it's simple. They love each other. The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I decide I want to be transgender. That's what I think I'd like to be. I'll make my life a lot easier. There should be zero discrimination. What's happening is too many transgender women of color are being murdered. They're being murdered.
Mr. President,
I mean, I think it's up to now 17. Don't hold me to that number, but it's
to better prepare our law enforcement officers to work in collaboration with the communities that they serve,
there is no
and also to protect the lives of innocent Black and
that there should be any right denied your daughter or daughters, whichever, if one or two, your daughter, that your other daughter has a right to be and do. None, zero. And by the way, my son Bo, who passed away, was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He was the guy who got the first transgender law passed in the state of Delaware, and because of a young man who became a woman who worked for him in the Attorney General's office.
Got one more segment coming up. Thank you.
And the Democrats just wouldn't go for it. They wouldn't go for it at all.
The Vice President and the People, a special edition of 2020. Here again, George Stephanopoulos.
Some people don't like it when I say it, but a lot of people agree. I have done more for the African-American community than any president, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln.
Good evening.
Criminal justice reform.
You say that you committed to entering this race after the events of Charlottesville in 2017.
I got them funded. They were on a year-to-year basis. They could have been put out of business.
As soon as our country had a little bad year, they would have said, I'm sorry, we're not going to fund you. I got a 10-year funding and financing, and more than they even asked for. I became very friendly with a lot of the heads. President Donald Trump and those rallying behind him towards the ideals of a more perfect union.
But criminal justice reform, everybody said it could not be done. President Obama and Biden never even tried to do it. They never even tried. But I say that, and I say it often, I'll say it loud, and I'm very proud of it.
learning
I
from
have a great relationship because of what I've done with the African American community. I'm very proud of it.
Let's go to our next question. We have Paulette Dale. She leans slightly to Biden. She voted for Clinton in 2016. She's registered as a Republican. Paulette, what's your question?
Good evening, Mr. President.
Thank you, Professor.
I have to say you have a great smile.
And making the case that I've been made and at the Biden Institute at the University of Delaware, focusing on,
you're so handsome when you smile.
The same issues relating to
as the daughter of immigrants to the United States who fled Eastern Europe due to religious persecution.
Public life to begin with.
The United States immigration policies are very personal for me.
Claremont, Delaware, and in Delaware, we have the 8th largest black population as a percent of population.
Americans and the majority of Republicans support the Dreamers program. So my question for you, Mr. President, is if you are elected to a second term, do you expect to pursue your previous efforts to cut the DACA program? Why or why not?
And the DACA is somewhat different than Dreamers. You understand that, and you understand it better than anybody probably in this room. Where do you come from, by the way, originally?
My grandparents were from Russia and Poland.
Every single solitary generation. So the dial has moved closer and closer more and more to inclusion.
We're going to take care of Dreamer.
We are a country that is a country of slaves who came here 400 years ago, indigenous people, and everyone else is an immigrant. And we're a diverse country. Unless we are able to treat people equally, we're just never going to meet our potential.
Mexico's working very closely with us. We have the strongest border we've ever had. We want people to come into our country. They have to come in legally. But we are working very hard on the DACA program, and you will be, I think, very happy over the course of the next year.
When I said I was running because I wanted to unify the country, people said, well, they're the old days.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, in point of fact, the DACA program, there are, under your administration, no new applicants are allowed. And in fact, the DACA recipients now have to renew every year as opposed to every 2 years. So in fact, the DACA program has been curtailed by your administration.
Well, what happened is because of the pandemic, much changed on the immigration front. Mexico is heavily infected, as you know, and we've made it very, very difficult to come in because of the pandemic and other reasons and crime. But we have a very strong border right now, and we have to keep it that way. But we want people to come into our country, but they have to come in through a merit system, and they have to come in legally. And people are very, very happy with it. You haven't heard any complaints about that.
George, I've never been more optimistic about the prospects for this country than I am today. I really mean that. I think the people
you have been promising this immigration bill since, well, at least July, when you told my colleague I knew it was coming, but nothing's come yet.
It's very happy that the fact is we got rid of catch and release, which is a disaster.
Take care of those who voted against me.
You catch somebody, they could be a murderer, they could be a rapist, and we're supposed to release them into our country.
We have the greatest opportunity of any country in the world to own the 21st
century. You're going to see something very, very good. The whole immigration, if you look at what's going on, people used to pour into our country, and especially during the pandemic. I think you'll be. I think even you, Savannah, would be very impressed.
Sir, we have about 30 seconds left. I think about people sitting out there tonight. There are some who love you. Some of them are sitting right around here, and some who will never vote for you. But there are people in the middle. There are people who aren't sure. There are people who want to know why they should give you a second chance and how you might improve in a second term.
Do you expect that
30
debate to
seconds.
happen?
What would you say to that?
Because they've done a great job. We had the strongest economy in the world. We closed it up. We are coming around the corner. The vaccines are coming out soon.
I took another test. I've been taking every day, the deep test, when they go.
We are at a level with jobs like we've never been before. We've rebuilt our military. We've rebuilt our borders. We had no borders. We had no nothing. We've rebuilt so much. We've given you the greatest tax cut in the history of our country. Greatest regulation cut, equally as important.
You're clear.
And we created new levels of jobs that nobody thought was possible. And next year is going to be better than ever before.
I got to leave it there. I got a wrap from the control room. Mr. President, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to the voters' questions. That concludes our town hall. We do want to thank the president again, as well as our audience in hot Miami and all of you watching at home. And a reminder, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are scheduled to meet in person a week from tonight in Nashville, a second and final presidential debate moderated by our own Kristen Welker. Have a good evening, and thanks for being with us.
I'm confident that the Cleveland Clinic is the one overseeing it. I think they're going to not let happen what happened last time. They're going to demand that it's safe.
That you expect to be there?
Well, I expect to be there.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for your time tonight. Thank all the questioners here. It was really terrific questions. I think you did a service to our democracy tonight. Thank you very much. I want to go back to my colleague David Muir in New York.